All right, so for the purposes of the recording, today is Tuesday, April 23rd, and welcome to our second Lunch and Learn for the 2024 National Volunteer Week that we're celebrating here in Nebraska. So thanks for being here today. If you're watching the recording, thanks for catching up with this great content that our colleagues from Minnesota will be sharing here soon. So with that being said, I would love to introduce Carrie Olson and Darcy Cole. They work with the 4-H volunteer systems, I believe, and with the 4-H program in Minnesota. And so officially welcome Carrie and welcome Darcy. Would you like to introduce yourselves?
For sure, I can start. So,
Mhm.
Darcy Cole, and I work here in Minnesota. My official role isn't volunteer systems. My official role is program operations, which is
Awesome.
probably far less exciting than volunteer system. So my role is like finances, risk management, insurance, contracts, all of those type of things. And I support the southern half, essentially, of Minnesota counties in that work. However, I do bring both personal and professional experience related to working with youth with disabilities to my role and kind of serve as one of the main contacts for that work here in Minnesota. So I'll turn it over to Carrie and let her tell you about herself.
Awesome.
My name is Carrie Olson. So working with Darcy and up here in Minnesota 4-H, I work with volunteer systems all of the time, I guess, with our state committee and then also with the southwestern part. And we annually kind of do a volunteers training piece. And last year we were able to partner with Darcy and a few other coworkers that have been working around this topic and just really enjoyed it. And I'm so excited to be able to bring some of the resources to you guys as well.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Carrie and Darcy, for being here. Before we get started, just like I usually do for volunteer lunch and learns, we have a quick poll here in which we want to gauge where you're at in your work with this topic. So right now on the screen, you should be seeing a couple of questions. The first one is rate your comfort level with supporting youth with special needs and 4-H experiences. So there's 5 through 1, 5 being uncomfortable and 1 being very comfortable. Okay, so there's that one. And then the second one is how ready is your group to serve youth of all abilities? So essentially rate yourself 1 through 5 and see how you feel about these two kind of warm-up questions today. Got some folks weighing in. That's fantastic. Keep those votes coming to see kind of where we sit right now with kind of our comfort level on these things. So I'm going to end the poll here and share the results. And this is what we look like right now, Carrie and Darcy. These are just kind of a great way to kind of preface our conversation today and what we'll be talking about and tackling and thinking about from a 4-H volunteer lens. If you're just joining us, thanks for being here today. We are just getting started, so great timing. And Carrie and Darcy, I'll go ahead and let you take over.
All right. Thanks, guys. Yeah. So we'll just go ahead and get started here. We're excited to really just have some great conversation with you guys and share some resources with you on just really trying to help support those youth with special needs in our 4-H experiences and talk about just creating those inclusive learning environments for our youth. We do have a folder here that afterwards we'll have all the resources in for you. So that I'll drop that in at the very end here as well. Okay. So we, of course, had to look up a map of Nebraska and counties and plugged it in here. And so we would love for everybody to have an opportunity to annotate and tell us where you're coming from. Myself, I'm just 5 hours straight north up I-29 from you today. Or 5 hours north of Omaha, I guess I should give context to that. But, and so I can't draw on the map, but I've been down to your area a few times. Darcy, where are you about at?
I am west central Minnesota, right? So I'm a little bit further yet from where Carrie's at. So I don't know. I didn't like maps it to see how far I am, but a little ways. How's that sound?
Yeah, I'm
The
starting to think, I bet you're only an
power
hour,
of
hour two.
technology. training. So
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, we got a big star there and it's in the middle. Are anybody else able to? I don't see anybody else, but
yeah,
maybe
and
you
if you're
can't
not
find it.
sure how to annotate, maybe give you some directions on that, depending upon what your Zoom looks like. On mine, in the lower left-hand corner, right above the audio button, there's like a circle with a green pencil with a line underneath it. If you click on that, it should say annotate. And then you can pick like to use a pencil. If you pick the, like pick an arrow, other shapes, that type of thing. So hopefully that helps you to be able to annotate and share that information.
Yeah, we do get a little bit spreading. I was gonna say we're looking
Awesome,
pretty
yeah.
southwest, yeah, southeast
Yeah.
here. Okay, well, great guys. Thanks for doing that. All right. So we just wanted to talk for a few minutes about why this work matters. Oops, and I should clear that out. So there we go. So we did do some of our homework before visiting with you guys and did find out that in Nebraska, about 8.1% of Nebraskans residents under the age of 65 have a disability or report having a disability. And that we also were able to find out that about 16% of the students in your school systems have some sort of special education services that they're receiving. So our goal, with 4-H programming is to match our community and our community demographics. So that should mean that we're trying to strive for having 16% of our participants having a disability. And so in order to grow our programs, at least here in Minnesota, we're really trying to look at and increase our supportive environments for our youth with disabilities. We know that, some people will be in our program that we don't even realize or recognize that they have a disability, because many disabilities are invisible. And so that's also interesting and important to know. So it's really about building relationships is one of the things we'll find out today, and having resources and places, safe places for people to share their disabilities with us if they want to, and so choose to do that so that we can support them, but then also asking those questions too and how we can help support. Based on one of the estimates out there, 5-year estimate, it's told us that about 218,000 Nebraskans live with a disability, and this kind of gives you the disability rates per county. So just kind of giving you an overview. I know I always want to go, okay, so here's the big state map, but what does it mean for me and where I'm at and where I'm working at? All right.
All right, so I'm going to provide for you a little bit of just basic information about disability work so that we're all talking about things in the same way and recognizing how it all kind of fits together. So first of all, we want to recognize that diversity does in fact include disability. A lot of us are doing some sort of disability work or focusing on how to increase the diversity in our programs, and this is one way to do so by tapping into a new audience. When we look at, what is definition of disability, or what is disability, it is any type of difficulty. It could be something physical, you can see emotional, behavioral, or it could be related to a learning disability or some sort of impairment that really just needs someone to have some extra support, some specialized services or accommodations in order for them to successfully participate in something. When we think about that, as Carrie mentioned earlier, there are a lot of invisible disabilities. So things that we can't necessarily know if someone has a disability unless they choose to disclose to us. So there are some things like we can see if someone is a wheelchair user. Right? That's a pretty easy thing for us to see a disability. But if someone has a learning disability, or maybe their disability comes in social impairments, we can't necessarily tell that they have a disability. And even when we interact with them, we may not know until they choose to disclose to us. Also important to recognize that people have to choose to disclose to us if they have a disability or not. So hopefully, as we're building relationships and comfort levels, people are going to feel more and more comfortable in doing that with us. And then the last piece we want to really talk about is we want to always make sure that we're presuming competence. And what that means is that we are assuming that people can understand and are able to do something unless they communicate to us otherwise and ask for that help. And that's really important because by us just presuming competence, it automatically will allow someone to be more successful in the environment. It also will drastically change how we interact with them. And we're going to talk a little bit about some disability etiquette today too. And, you know, if we're presuming that someone is capable, we're automatically starting off with the right mindset when we're doing disability work. All right, Carrie, if you want to go to the next slide. So we're going to talk then just a little bit about, you know, what are the different types of disabilities, and this is important so that we're all kind of thinking about it in the same way. It's also important for us to recognize that every person is unique, so that means that their disability is unique, and the ways that we support them is also going to be unique to them personally. So one thing that we try for someone may not always work in the same way or be as successful as someone else. We also want to think about disability as being both permanent and temporary. That's not to say that a permanent and temporary disability are equal to each other, or one is better or worse than the other, right? But what it does want us to recognize is the fact that at some point in our lives, all of us are going to have something we're going to face that's going to require us to need some extra support or maybe some accommodations, if you will, in order for us to be successful. You know, so as we think about some of those permanent disabilities and we think about an intellectual disability, that might be something like Down syndrome, or it could be Fragile X syndrome, some sort of developmental delay. But essentially, it's really any difficulty in communicating, learning, or retaining information. And it also may drastically or significantly impact someone's daily living skills, such as self-care or keeping safe in their environment, being able to communicate or socialize with other people. It also might mean that someone processes information a little bit more slowly. They might find communication and daily living skills just hard, and they may have difficulty in abstract concepts, so things like time or money. Someone that may also have a temporary intellectual disability from a concussion, let's say, or maybe for me personally, when I get a migraine, like my thought process just doesn't function the way that it typically does. So that might be another example of a temporary disability. As we think about physical disabilities, those are things that oftentimes, but not always, we can see. They affect someone's personal physical capacity or their mobility. And there's a lot of different causes or reasons that someone may have a physical disability. It could include an inherited or genetic disorder. It could be something that comes on from a serious illness someone had or from an injury. And as we're thinking about that, you know, those permanent type of disabilities might be someone is a wheelchair user. Again, maybe it's something that was inherited or developmental wise, it might be from an injury. A temporary type of physical disability might be someone breaking their hand or breaking their ankle or something like that, is an example of that. Our third type of disability that we're going to talk about today is sensory disabilities. And those really impact someone's sensory system. And that includes things like sight, hearing, smell, touch, and taste. So kind of like those five senses we think about. And it's important to recognize that about 95% of the information that we take in from the world and process comes from our sensory system, is from that sight, from that hearing. So a sensory related disability can really affect how a person gathers information from the world around them. And it can really impact every part of their life. So some examples of that might be something like autism spectrum disorder, or it might be a sensory processing disorder for those permanent type of things. It might also be a sensory disability, might be related to migraine. So someone might be super sensitive to light or sound when they do have that type of situation they're experiencing temporarily. The final type of disability is a mental health disability. So those can very significantly impact how someone feels, how they think, they behave, or even how they interact with others around them. Mental health related disabilities can also be super difficult and even debilitating for those that are experiencing them, as well as their family, their friends, those around them that are supporting them. And something that's maybe a little more unique with this type of disability is it can be permanent, it can be temporary, or it can just come and go depending upon what someone is experiencing at that time in their life. Some examples of some mental health related disabilities could be things like bipolar disorder, depression, or even anxiety disorders as well. So lots of different types of disabilities that you may experience in your work as a 4-H volunteer. All right, Carrie, if you want to go forward a slide. And I'm going to turn it back over to Carrie then for a little bit.
Thanks, Darcy. So how do you know what to do? We did check your Nebraska policy, in that if you believe you need accommodation, it says to contact faculty, staff, disability services, your contact information, or I'm sure even reaching out to Jill. But first of all, really start by asking the youth if they're able to advocate for themselves and explain to you what their disability is and what kind of supports. Really, that can be a great first step in allowing you to help them be successful. If a young person's not able to share the information on behalf of themselves, certainly go ahead and ask their parents or their guardians. In general, people will not be offended if you ask about how you can best support them or their young person. In fact, usually they're going to be glad that you took the time and you cared enough to ask. It's a trial and error process. It's important to recognize that everything we try may not be successful the first time, and that's okay. So try again, try something else. That's how we learn, and that's how we come up with new ideas and hopefully find something that's better. Developing those relationships is the key piece. We know that with youth development, and it's so true, even more so when we're dealing with special needs and ways to support people. The more comfortable you are with the 4-H'er and their family are with you, they're going to be more open and sharing what they need to be successful. And that really goes in hand with open communication, is making sure that they understand we have their best interest in place. We want them to participate. We want them to have other opportunities that other 4-H'ers have as well. And so that really opens up that piece. There's also a tool that Darcy will share in a little bit on a one-page descriptor that comes out. It really just helps you think about being that person-centered and helps you focus on what individual needs and desires, and not just a person that is with a disability, but what everyone needs and desires to be successful. Enrollment information is also a good source. I'm thinking you guys use 4-H Online, correct, Jill? Is that right? And so there are different places there that ask for health information. It also asks any other information that you'd like to include. Usually people are, telling us more medical things, and medications they might be taking, allergies, et cetera. But it's also a place that people can share specific things related to a disability. In Minnesota, we also have an accommodations request form. It's on our Minnesota 4-H website, just a screenshot there in this page. But it asks families some basic information, and it's really, what information is helpful for us to know. So we're allowing the families to figure out what do they want to disclose to us. And then the second question on there really asks, what accommodations are they requesting? And it gives a spot for people to tell us specifically, what can we do, what's worked for them in the past. And again, it's all on a need to know basis. And then what, are there places that we can share this with volunteers, staff, judges? It's not going to be broadcast to the whole, put in the next newsletter. No, it's really, who's working with this individual and helping them be successful in a future opportunity. And, our goal again is just making sure that we have that positive, successful experience for our 4-H'er. All right.
All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about disability etiquette. I kind of hinted at this earlier, but one of the things that oftentimes can cause us to worry a little bit when we're working with someone with disability is that we don't know exactly how to interact with them, or what appropriate etiquette is, or what to say or not say. So we're going to give you, with your resources, there's a disability etiquette handout that you'll be able to reference. And I'll kind of hit some of the high points of that so that you know a little bit about what you might see on there. So one critical piece always when we talk about disability etiquette is to make sure that we're speaking directly to the person. And that sometimes feels maybe weird because you might want to go to a parent or a caregiver, but it's really important that if that person can speak on behalf of themselves, that we're speaking directly to them. Again, that's part of presuming competence. It's presuming that each young person can be part of the conversation about themselves and what they need to be successful. And along with that, when we're having those conversations, we want to make sure that we're using person first language. That's something that might be a new term to some of you, but really it's about making sure that we are putting the person before the label when we're talking about it. So for example, that might be saying that it's a 4-H'er with autism, rather than saying it's a autistic 4-H'er. So again, that it's really about putting the person first and then the label afterwards. There are a couple of exceptions kind of to that rule, and really it's about personal preference. But when we talk about the autism community and we talk about the deaf and hard of hearing community, those communities often want to use what we would call disability first language. So they would say an autistic person or a blind person or a deaf person. But the key piece with that, when we talk about what type of language to use, is ask if you're not sure, or listen to how that person is referring to themselves and model that same type of language that they're using, because that's obviously what their preference is. Another trap that we can fall into sometimes is helping too much. We always want to, again, presume that competence, ask before we help someone, because sometimes people do want to struggle a little bit so that they can continue to develop those skills and be more and more independent all of the time. It's also important to be thoughtful about our physical contact that we might have with someone. So again, before offering physical assistance, ask, presume someone can do it, and be thoughtful about the type of gestures we're using. So don't pat people on the head or do other things like that. So as I mentioned, the handout also will include some words to avoid. There is some language that historically maybe was appropriate, but is no longer appropriate because it is derogatory in its meaning. So just refer to that handout for some of those language type of things as well. And we know that some of this etiquette may be new to you and might be uncomfortable, but know that people with a disability, they have lots of experience getting around and making their way through the world. And it's really their lived experience. So we don't want to be like labeling those lived experiences being courageous or brave, like just getting up and doing the day, because that can really feel patronizing to someone. Yes, there are times that all of us are brave and courageous in our day and in our life, but labeling everyday tasks as being brave and courageous really isn't accurate. And it also puts youth with disability in a different category rather than helping them to feel like they belong in our 4-H programs. One final point about etiquette I want to make is just that when we're describing somebody with a disability using terms like regular or normal, leave those young people with disabilities being in an abnormal category. And we know from the statistics that Carrie shared earlier today that it's really not accurate. You know, we have 16% of our youth in Nebraska that are receiving special education services. So that's a pretty good chunk of people. And also using language that is considering somebody to be not normal, right, or abnormal, can be really hurtful to our youth and our families. And we don't want to marginalize them anytime that we can. So again, refer to that disability etiquette handout. There's some great ideas. One of the pages is just general etiquette. And then the second page of it is etiquette that is specifically related to different types of disabilities. So someone who is blind or someone who uses a wheelchair, whatever that might look like. So reference that and use it as a starting place as you're starting to continue to have experiences and get more and more comfortable in interacting with people with disabilities. But also know that sometimes you might do something that isn't right, but just keep learning, keep doing better. And most people are going to be fairly flexible and understanding of that because you're learning, right? And we all are learning all of the time. All right, Carrie, if you want to go to the next slide. So Carrie mentioned, as we kind of talked about, like, how do we know what to do? This 1-page description activity. So this is a 1-page description for me. A 1-page description is really a brief overview of what is important both to and for someone. And it can also be used as an introduction to someone. So the way that we would recommend that you use this is everybody in your 4-H group would use this, not just the 4-Hers with a disability. It's a great way for young people to answer a few questions for themselves. It could be used as a template for maybe giving a mini demonstration, either to a large group or to like small subgroups within your group. Also is a great way to think about and plan your 4-H activities that you do throughout the year. One of the cool things about this 1-page description is that unlike enrollment data, this activity, whenever possible, should be completed by the 4-Hers themselves. Enrollment data is probably completed by a parent or caregiver who was ever enrolling them for the year. But this is a way for the 4-Her themselves to be able to advocate for their own needs and share what they think people should know about them. The example we're sharing with you today is really a general example that would apply across all 4-H settings. However, it is worth noting that you can change the questions that appear on this one-page description based on what you want to know. So for example, if you're looking at county fair, you might want to have, questions related to the county fair experiences, or maybe you want to do something about a livestock show. You would have the bubbles on there be related to specific things that you might want to know for that. So you can see on the example I have here on the screen, there's 4 questions. There's what is important to me. So that's a place for a person to be able to share what do they need, right? What do they need to feel valued when they're doing things. So you can see I've got some examples there about me. That second bubble underneath it is what people admire about me. And that's important because oftentimes we don't always take time to think about what we're good at. And someone with a disability, oftentimes what they're looking at or talking about or thinking about, at least people around them, is the supports they need, the challenges they have, the limitations maybe that their disability provides. So this is a great way for someone to share what they're good at. And it also might be a way for you to learn some ideas of things that you can use that are strengths for someone to help support and build your 4-H group. So you can see one of mine is organizational skills is strength for me. So if I were a 4-H'er, that might be maybe I could help plan a 4-H meeting or activity. The third box is how can you best support me? So that's where some of those accommodation ideas are probably going to come out. So that somebody might say, I need to have a wheelchair ramp to get in a space, or I need to have push buttons to be able to open up the door, or I need to have things in writing and hear them because I just need that extra processing time. And then that final box is what do I want to learn about? So this is a great way to get ideas about guest speakers, field trips, activities that you want to do throughout the course of the year, because it really allows that young person to drive their learning. So the question is, why would we want to do these, right? Like I said earlier, it's a great way to get to know each other a little bit. It also allows for more person-centered planning, or in other words, it allows the person to be actively involved in planning for their success and to be able to self-advocate for themselves. It's an opportunity for everyone to get to know each other a little bit better, and provides another outlet for people to provide information about themselves outside of enrollment data or outside of whatever other type of accommodation request process you might have there. So it's really a great tool that we can use within our 4-H groups. So again, make sure that everybody completes these if you choose to do this activity, and then make sure you don't do it and forget about it. Make sure you're actually utilizing it. So think about, how can you use the answers someone puts on here to be able to support your 4-H activities throughout the year. All right, Carrie, if you want to go next slide. As I mentioned earlier, some ways that you might want to use that one-page description is use it for planning purposes. Help plan the activities, the speakers, the tours you think that people want to do through your group. Also use it for demonstrations to be able to share a little bit about themselves. It's a great way to get to know each other, and people are probably more comfortable sharing about themselves than maybe they might be about a project area or something like that. And again, you can use it to discover the needs of those in the group. And it could be the 4-Hers. You might also have parents do that, because you might find out that parents have some great knowledge, expertise that they can also help support your 4-H group in. All right, next one. So another piece that we just want to highlight too is sometimes we can have behavior that is challenging in our groups. And that can be for young people with a disability and people that don't have a disability as well. And it's important as we think about behavior to remember that all behavior is a form of communication. And sometimes it becomes behavior versus verbal communication, because someone may not have the skills or ability to verbally communicate something. Or it might also be that someone is communicating something verbally to us and we aren't taking it in. We aren't reacting based on what they're telling us. So they're using their behavior as a super loud way to give a message about something that they need or that isn't right, maybe. There's always a reason for those challenging behaviors. So think about, like, what is the reason behind behavior? And there can also be more than one reason for a specific behavior. So if you're doing a 4-H activity and you're asking someone to fill out a sheet of paper, they crumple that paper up, they throw it on the floor in your group. It might be because they're frustrated because fine motor and writing is difficult. It might be because they aren't engaged with what you're doing and they don't have any interest in it. It might be because what you gave them seems like it's too easy for them. A lot of reasons that we might see the same exact behavior, and it's important to recognize that. We also know that people can learn to understand behavior. So the more that we tune into what people are communicating through behavior and what things we're seeing happen before a behavior, that can help us to interpret and hopefully reduce the amount of challenging behavior we see. And then finally, it's also important to recognize that challenging behavior can be reduced through support, not punishment. If we take away something or have a consequence, that can have a short-term impact in stopping behavior, but it won't stop behavior long-term. The way to stop behavior is really to learn what that behavior is communicating and help that young person to communicate things in a different, more positive way, and to be able to help them learn some supports and some strategies that they can use to help avoid and work through those communication challenges that can result in behavior challenges. All right, so as we think about behavior, we have kind of like 3 questions that we might want to think about as we're processing behavior. So think about, what are some scenarios that you've maybe had in your 4-H group that you've faced that's been a challenging behavior. Maybe it's young people that are making inappropriate, rude comments. Maybe it's a young person who's running around the room while you're trying to do things, or talking while you're also trying to do that. So if we think about these 3 questions, it will really help us to be able to process that behavior and hopefully reduce those challenging behaviors in the future. So the first one is, why is that behavior happening? So what's causing that behavior? Second one is, what is that behavior communicating? So why are they using behavior to communicate something? And what is that, right? Is it that they're uncomfortable, they're bored, whatever? And then the final one is, how do I find out more from youth and families about how I can support the young person? So think about, like, what are ways that you can support, reduce the challenging behavior, help someone communicate in a different way, rather than those behaviors that maybe are a little more difficult in your group. All right, Carrie, then we're going to switch and talk just a little bit about accommodations. And we're going to have some time in a little bit for you actually to be in some groups. And I don't know if we want to do breakout groups or if we want to like do a big group, or how I want to do it. So we'll have to think about that a little bit, because we don't have a huge number of people on today. But want to start that conversation about really talking about, like, what are our accommodations, right? Accommodations can seem challenging, they can seem difficult, overwhelming. Also, sometimes they seem like a judgment call. So really, accommodations are any strategies that we might use to reduce or eliminate a barrier so that someone can better learn and participate in what we're doing. They can be adaptations to the material, so the things we're physically using. It might be to the environment, so the space we're in, how we lead an activity or teach something, or how people participate in what we're doing. It's also important to recognize that even though we may have an accommodation that we're going to do for 1 or 2 4-Hers who ask for that accommodation, those things can be used and can be beneficial to everyone in the room, even if that accommodation wasn't designed for them. So an example might be using a visual schedule, which a visual schedule is just simply like having pictures of what you're going to do throughout the course of the day, or your time together. Or it could also be like visual directions, so pictures showing what you're going to do as you're doing your project. So like I said, we might do that for 1 or 2 kids, but those accommodations are going to benefit everybody in the room. So just remember that many times our accommodations are going to benefit everyone, even if they weren't designed for them. So as I mentioned, we have 3 types of accommodations we're going to talk about, and we're going to spend a little bit of time digging further into these, so that you can think about how they might actually play into your 4-H experiences that you have. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Carrie. And I don't know, Carrie, if we want to do just really small breakout groups and have just a couple people in each group, or if we maybe just want to pick one of these categories and tackle it as a big group together. I'll let you make that call, since this is kind of your activity to lead.
So how about with the group, could you guys be agreeable to like jump in and unmic yourself, or type in the chat box? Then maybe we could introduce each one. So like our first one is environmental. We'll kind of do a brainstorm, any ideas that come to mind.
Yeah.
And then we'll go to the slide that talks about it a little bit more. That negotiable? All
I
right.
think that
So,
sounds
Yeah, I
great.
think that makes sense because otherwise
Yeah.
they're going to be just
Yeah.
in little groups and they may
Yeah.
not have as much rich conversation if there's just two of them. So
Yeah, we'll spark more ideas too. I think one idea sometimes leads to another idea. Yeah. Okay, so what we wanted to do is just really think about, so that first one that Darcy mentioned, those environmental accommodations, what kind of environmental accommodations may have you used in the past, or have you thought about that you could make in your
yeah,
group?
so think about anything related to the environment in your 4-H setting, which might be a livestock show ring, it might be a club meeting setting, it might be some other type of 4-H activity. So think about how could you do some things, or how have you done some things in the environment that will help make it more accessible for people?
So I suspect a really common one just to get us going, is that whole piece about, a lot of our buildings now, we go to places that have ramps. We have places so that if you're a wheelchair, you're walking with, some accessible tools, you're able to get into the building. So that piece is maybe one that's regularly being happening. You guys think of any other environmental ones?
One that we do in Phelps County, we normally use our extension office because they are all wheelchair accessible. So that way it's one less thing that we have to worry about. But another thing that we have learned with a couple kiddos with the environment is we go somewhere that's very the walls are plain. There's not a lot of things for them to, wander and look in the room. And then something else that we have done is we started having some fidgets on the table for those kids that instead of sitting there clicking their pen, they have something to like a spinner or something to just play with. And we've really noticed a difference with keeping their attention.
Hey, great ideas. Yeah.
And we meet at my home, and so we no longer meet in the living room because that doesn't work. And so we meet at the dining room table, and we have our meeting there, and we do our projects there, and it keeps them more focused to be at the dining room table. And it's a long table, and we just everybody's up at the table, and that helps those who have wandering tendencies to in either
Overwhelmed by all the other things in the
yeah,
house. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, they just focus in, and then they're right there, and you can call them back easier than in the living room where they are, I don't know, and they, even though they're sitting by their friends, still it isn't so easy to be distracted.
Sure. Yeah. Anybody else have some ideas to add to that? Thinking about the environment?
I've kind of done the same thing. I have such a variety of ages. I can't attest to any known physical disabilities within our club, but we have a handful of maybe behavioral related things that go on. And I don't know about everybody else, but we consistently are getting prompted to do a trash pickup or do something along those lines. And I've literally had to steer us away and keep it more controlled because kind of what was just described. I know that the environment would not be suited to keep youth safe and engaged, and we would have wandering, and we would have things that were no longer in control. And so I'm very careful at keeping things controlled by using a larger meeting room that, even though it's large, we still fill it. And keeping those parents engaged and really truly asking those parents to stay at the meetings because it helps us help the kids that need that little extra guidance.
Those are great tools to remember. And yep, we're just trying to keep everybody safe. Yep. Any other ideas that we want to add? Otherwise, we'll let Darcy give us a little more. Okay.
All right, Carrie. So, environmental accommodations, here's some examples of things. You guys have mentioned some of these. There's some other things that maybe we haven't talked about. So one of them is to think about, are your facilities accessible, right? And you kind of mentioned that earlier, right? Having those things at your extension office where it is. We do have a resource we'll share with you. It's a facility accessibility assessment. And essentially it's a checklist that goes through thinking about all of the different accessibility things you might need to, from, you know, being able to have push buttons for doors, thinking about elevator access, thinking about bathroom and changing facilities for those who are way too big to fit on a changing table, for example. My 14-year-old of single bathroom stall is real tight for us because she's the same size as I am, right? So to think about how do we think about those things ahead of time and plans for someone so that they're going to be comfortable and be successful in our environment. Another thing to think about is, you know, arranging intentionally our spaces for specific purposes. So kind of going back to, you know, you talked about maybe our living room isn't the best place for us to meet, but when we sit at the table, we're really successful. So again, helping to help someone understand that different environments and spaces have different behavior expectations and different types of work or things that we're going to do in those. So if you have a big enough space, it might mean a space where here's where we're going to do our fun games, activities. Here's where we're going to do our learning. Here's where we're going to do our snack. So just helping to really set some of those expectations that way. Another one that came up was having sensory tools or fidgets. Those can really help everyone with or without a disability to be able to have something to keep their hands busy, and to be able to get out some of that energy and be able to then focus on what you're trying to teach them. Another thing to think about is, you know, do we have wide enough aisles, and are the table heights appropriate for wheelchair users? So that, you know, can be everything from our 4-H buildings with our exhibits and displays, right? Do we have room for wheelchairs or, you know, strollers, that type of thing to be able to fit through, to just the aisles between our seating at a meeting. Other one to think about is, are your items within reach? So again, we want to have people be as independent as they can. So we don't want to have people ask us to grab things off of high shelves, that because they are not in a height where they can reach them within their wheelchair or other type of environment they might be using. So another thing to think about is, how do we reduce those distractions? So, you know, having those spaces where there's not a whole lot of outside things to see, to hear, that's going to then take away from their ability to focus on what we want them to. Other thing to think about is, you know, do we have a quiet place that someone can go if they need a break, either because they're overwhelmed, they, you know, have some sensory needs, whatever that is. Could be a hallway, could be stepping outside, could be a separate room, whatever that looks like. But again, a place for someone to just re-regulate themselves so they can come in and be successful in our environment and our experience. Another is to think about, are we posting our social rules or the expectations that we have in our space? Because if we are not telling people explicitly and reminding of them what those rules are, we can't expect them to follow them. And then the final one to think about is, you know, do you have a variety of seating and standing options? We don't always have to sit at a table for a meeting. People can stand, they can walk around, whatever that looks like. And it's really important that we help people to understand that they need to do whatever's going to make them comfortable. All right, Carrie, then let's move on and talk a little bit about our next category of accommodation.
This one is really thinking about those materials and supplies that an individual might need. Let's just take a couple ideas, sharing out if anybody has. What are some accommodations you might have made with materials or supplies in the past? Anybody can think of anything? Otherwise, we can maybe pop in some ideas and then we can go from there, build off of there. So Darcy, maybe we'll let you.
For sure. All right, so
I was just thinking of left-hand scissors. Not being right-handed, and so then you need a left hand. You need to accommodate for like rotary cut when you are using the rotary cutter, and so many things like that. And it is easy to not think that way when you are not left-handed, and you so
Well, you're probably a great connection, Marcia, because I understand you do some sewing clubs and thinking of that perspective. Yeah.
so. Yeah, and like you said, you really hit it on, like, if you don't have to think about it, you probably aren't thinking about it, right? If it's not part of your worldview. So so I think really it's about just having that extra awareness, so that we are hopefully thinking about things proactively. Some ideas, so think about, you know, simple is good. We don't need to overcomplicate things. We can use things that we already have, maybe just in a new or different way. Also, it can be helpful to have in 4-H, we do a lot of hands-on experiences, which is good, right? Like people with a disability and all people learn often many times better through doing hands-on things than you talking to them. So we automatically have that good model of helping people to be successful that way. We also might want to use manipulative, so things people can touch, they can feel, versus just talking about a concept. Another example is texturized stabilizers, which can simply be like cutting a sheet of shelf lining paper and putting it on the table where someone's going to work. And that way, like their paper, their materials will stick to that. It also might be, you know, sticking on the back of a ruler, for example, like either some shelf liner paper or there's this cool tape called grip tape, which essentially like it feels like sandpaper. People sometimes use it like on steps so that their feet can kind of get a better grip. Could be used on the back of, like I said, a ruler. So if, you know, in Marcia and your sewing club, you're using that to help them cut and draw straight lines or measure things, like having that little bit of extra texture can help them to not worry so much about their ruler sliding around on their material. Another example are fine motor and gross motor grasping support. So it could be pencil grips. It might be using grip tape or tubing on door handles, water faucets, whatever that might look like. Just anything that helps someone be able to get a better grip on something. It's also really great to just mark things. So use Post-it notes, flags, highlighters, so that people can really see, what do you want me to focus on? Right. So a lot of times we give someone something that has lots of text, more text than they actually need to know or do something with. So if we can really indicate on there what things they need to focus on, it will help them to be more successful, especially if someone has a learning disability. And then the final one would be, you know, think about using a variety of different textures, skill levels, sizes, shapes, all of those type of things. So you talked about scissors. You can see on the slide here, that's a mounted scissors. So with that, someone uses one hand to push the top of it, and another hand can be used to like move the paper or material or whatever you're going to cut with that. Can be done like one person doing both those steps. It might also be that someone has a support person, either they're pushing the paper or material and the other person is guiding it, or vice versa. They also make a lot of different scissors. They have like loop scissors that only allow a scissors to open so far. So it's just easier for someone's hand to use. So just think about like, what are those things that they can use? We'll also provide for you an information sheet on our accommodation kits that we have here in Minnesota. And we have a lot of the different examples of these type of things in those kits. And it gives you some good ideas to help think about what are some tools you could have to help make things more accessible always when you have them. And the key piece with materials and supplies is have them available, right? You know, don't have to have someone ask for special scissors or ask for some of those special things that might help them, pencil grips, whatever that might be. If you're using scissors, just have all these other scissors too, and they can use the one that works for them. Or, you know, they make like pencils, crayons, markers that are a triangular shape, which are easier to grip for someone. So you'd have out those like round shape pencils, markers, crayons, and you'd have out the triangular ones too. And people can pick and choose whatever is going to be the best fit for them without having to draw attention to themselves or ask for that. So other ideas that some of you might have around material and supply accommodations. All right, Carrie, we can probably go on to the last category then.
So yeah, the last category then is really around teaching accommodations. So how are ways that you might change what you're teaching, adapt what you're teaching to make it more supportive for everybody? Anybody have ways they may have done that in the past? All right, now I'm going to grab the screen here, or the thing. You've probably thought of a few of these, but we'll let Darcy go through them for us.
Yeah, so one of them is, you know, simplify things. So don't give 5 steps that someone needs to follow. Give them 1 step, let them do it. Give them another step, let them do it. Because otherwise they might only be able to focus on that last thing they heard. So that's what they're going to jump to. Use simple language, so don't use things like it's raining cats and dogs. If someone doesn't understand social things, that's really confusing for them, right? To have those type of things. And again, just use simple language. It's really important. Use a variety of communication methods. So, have things in writing, say them verbally, all of those type of things. You also might need to allow some additional time. Sometimes it can be uncomfortable to allow extra wait time, but that can be important too, because some people need more process time. So by just allowing that extra wait time or extra time to complete something, then people don't feel hurried and they feel like they can actually answer and do the learning the best that they can. Another thing might be to reduce the amount of writing or pencil work we're doing. So rather than writing something, can someone create a video? Can they share it verbally? Can they tell someone else who's going to write it? Whatever that looks like, but just make sure that you're providing different ways for someone to show their learning. And then finally, use visuals. So some examples you can see on the slide, those are visual schedules. So there's one called a first, then next. With that, there's 3 boxes. You put maybe less desirable things in the first and then the next is like the reward thing. You'd base what you put in those on the person's ability. Could be pictures. I like actual pictures of something. Could be stick figures, could be words. And by having those listed there, it allows them to get through less desirable things to things that they want to do in that next box. Visual, that today's schedule is the same way. Pictures, words, whatever that needs to be in the big boxes, and then people can check them off as they do them, kind of like a to-do list, or they can move pictures from the big to the little box if you have Velcro or whatever that might look like. Another example is social stories, and we'll have links for those too for you. But a social story walks someone through what they're going to experience, what they're going to do, and points out some of the social nuance things that they might just not pick up on otherwise. We have a couple examples on our 4-H site. They include a county fair 4-H building entry day, and they include a club experience. So some of those overwhelming and common things that our 4-Hers might do. And then the final one is the incredible 5-point scale, which is a tool that people can use to check in, tell where they're at, how they're feeling, and really use it for some emotional regulation as well. So if you want to learn more about that, if you Google 5-point scale, and I'm assuming it's in our resources too, for you to be able to see an example of that. So those are some examples of teaching or the way that you interact with people and how you might make accommodations to that. Do others have things that they would like to share around that category?
Yes, though I have worked with disability all my life, one of mine is not being a reader, and so I've worked with kids who weren't readers yet at 7th grade, and so I'm really conscious of that. And so what I do, and currently I have young kids, and like if you're working with Clover kids and high school kids at the same meeting, I am real aware of that, and so you want to make it as least easy as possible. And one thing I have learned to do with, like, when I get a new member is I tell the new member in a email or privately that mom gets to help new members. That's how it is with new members. They get to help. So like I have a guessing jar, so mom gets to read what the guessing jar instructions are. Mom gets to help with the guessing jar. Mom gets to help with the question that we're doing, or if there's any reading, mom gets to help. And so the reading part is it's completely can be masked, that's done. And as they got older, and if they still couldn't read, then we just mask it in different ways. I read it and I just pretended like I was reading it for everybody's benefit. But I do think you need to be aware of that. People aren't all readers, and they aren't all reading at the same time. And just because some read it 2nd grade or 1st grade, then not all do. And so, or even understand it that well. And so you need to accommodate that way, in a way. I think that's a important accommodation.
Yeah, I think that's a great one to share because yeah, you in the key pieces you can't tell, right? You can't necessarily tell.
No.
You know, and not everybody's going to be at the same ability level. I mean, my 14-year-old is nonverbal, can't read, do any of those things, but I have a, you know, a 9-year-old on the other end of the spectrum who like does really well in school, right? Was really,
Oh,
really
sure.
far
That's
ahead
right.
of her peers, you know? So yes, like you have to kind of do
And
your
I think
best to accommodate
that
that whole here.
right. And I think that reading one for for some kids, like our son was dyslexia, and his problem was, and it was so masked because he was bright. And so nobody could suspect. It was so hidden that he couldn't, that nobody guessed. And so then it was almost embarrassment for him. You know, he couldn't really reveal it.
You guys were
He,
doing really good at providing him the supports he needed to be successful.
well, and that's what we did. Yes, that's what we did.
Mhm.
But you know, he didn't want to reveal it. He
Right.
didn't want to. He wanted to always have those accommodations. And I just really I want to always provide those accommodations for any kid. I don't want them to be in that situation ever to
Mhm.
be. So if I see any kid struggling in any situation like that, I try to pick up on what that is. You know, okay, so now how can we kind of help them, but not embarrass them in any way? Because I think there's some embarrassment that goes, you know, and that's what you don't want to do. You don't want to make them feel like they're different or that they, yeah. So
You're,
I,
you're a great asset to your 4-H program there, Marcia. We thank you for doing that because yeah, you're just what the kids want. They want to be just like everybody else. They just want to be normal.
that's right, they do, and they are in, but they have their I our the person who tested our son, he just said everybody has a disability of some kind, and some are hidden, and some are not, and everybody needs to learn to compensate. And I remind my kids and those I work with that you all have issues
Yep.
that you're going to have sometime. So be careful how you treat others.
My kids would tell you that I have a child with special needs too. He has epilepsy, it's nonverbal and some other things, but my kids know the line, we're all unique. We
Yeah,
are all unique. So
yeah, that's
yeah.
yeah. So we've got to remember that, I think. And kids who haven't encountered that yet, they don't understand. So that's why you've got
Yeah.
to help. That that's almost as much of a problem as a leader dealing with it is helping your kids deal with it with other people.
Mhm.
I mean, that's the bigger problem, really, is getting your kids to not uh, to be patient with it and to be kind and to
Yeah. I
help
think
them.
that's why you, like you said, be kind. We offer it out to everyone. We're kind to everyone, then it's not unique in a way. But well, we're gonna try to pull ourselves together here because I know you guys only had so much time that you're setting aside for a conversation today. And one of our reflection questions that we had up there was just, is there one thing, that you might have learned today that you might be able to take away? If you wanted to put that in the chat box, would be kind of an awesome spot. We do have a little bit of an short, I think it's maybe 6 questions, evaluation assessment. If you want to do that QR code, if you take a picture of it, the link will pop up. Otherwise, we can pop that down in the chat box. And we're also open to some questions. And yeah, I'll turn it over to Darcy. You got any other things you can think of here as we try to wrap up?
No, I know we shared a lot of things real quick with you in an hour. But hopefully there's one or two kind of nuggets that stick with you of something that you can take and use in your 4-H experiences to support young people even more. And as I mentioned earlier, like the supports we put in place might be for young people with disabilities, but many of the things that we do are going to support everyone in the space, whether or not they have a disability or whether or not they've asked for an accommodation.
And we will make sure that in the post-webinar material that Jill sends out, we'll also have her designate where the Google folder is that has all the resources so that we make sure no one doesn't get access to that.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Carrie and Darcy, for being with us today. I know I learned a lot, and based on our conversation, I think others did as well. So thanks again for sharing this and for those who will watch the recording as well. I'm just going to quickly launch our post question for today, and we're just going to actually go back and revisit the same things that we did at the beginning. And rating your comfort level with supporting youth with special needs. And so now that we've learned from Carrie and Darcy, rate yourself in that way. And then also tell us how ready your group might be now to serve youth of all abilities. So a couple pieces there. If you can share your thoughts there as well, we appreciate it. Awesome. So thanks again for attending, and thanks for being on today. We definitely appreciate the conversation. And I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, and hopefully we'll see a lot of you tomorrow for leading a group with primarily younger members. So have a great rest of your day, and hopefully we'll see you tomorrow.